There's at least one right over there.
All right, we will resume the 2018 budget hearings. It is October 31st. It is Halloween.
Oh, wow.
You and the sheriff are on Halloween, so I don't know if there's any correlation there or not, but it's 1 o'clock, and we'll do the engineering and soil and water. And so Rob's got multimedia today.
Just charting.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, well, we'll turn it over to you, and you can talk about 2018.
All right.
And beyond. I know you do a good job of laying out well beyond 2018, which is very important.
Thank you, Commissioners. Chris Boserman, County Engineer, and Rob Riley, Chief Deputy Engineer. We are here to talk to you about our budget for 2018, and we would like to highlight for you the 5-year plan that we gave you in terms of our longer-range outlook for capital improvements on our transportation system in the county. As you're aware, we have 3 separate funds that operate under my authority as a county engineer. The 100 Road and Bridge Project Fund is actually a portion of your general fund that's funded solely from a share of the county's sales tax, and then we have our Motor and Gas Fund that's funded primarily from motor vehicle fees, gasoline tax, a share of the state gas tax, and a portion of the motor vehicle registration fees for residents who reside in Delaware County. Their registration fees come to us. We also have a stormwater NPDES Phase 2 fund, which is the county's effort to respond to our obligations as under the EPA as a urbanizing community addressing water quality issues, and so those activities happen under my jurisdiction, and we have a separate fund that funds those activities. So those are the 3 areas that I'll be talking to you about budget-wise today. I'd like to start with the 100 Road and Bridge Project Fund. The expected beginning balance in 2018, the year-end balance in 2017, is projected to be $1.3 million. We're expecting $17.16 million in revenue and $18.135 in expenditures, and projecting a balance of $314,500 at the end of 2018. The expenditures fall into the normal categories, except that you'll note we have no salary or fringe benefit expenditures out of that fund. There are no employees who are paid out of the capital project fund, and our philosophy is that money should go entirely to capital improvement projects and related activities. And so we do have this year a $10,000 expenditure for services and charges. There is a public education component of our requirements for the Phase 2 EPA requirements that I mentioned previously, and those are because the EPA's definition of a storm sewer basically includes our roadway ditches and all the drainage facilities related to our roadway projects. We have one of the components of meeting the permit for that activity is an education and public outreach component, and we actually contract with the Soil and Water District to provide that service. They're doing that for other communities as well, and so we have that expenditure this year out of the capital project fund, primarily because our requirements under that continue to grow as we build and expand our transportation system. The capital outlays are at $17.4 million, and that is a 23% increase over last year. And I don't know to the extent you'd like to go through the specific projects. If you'd like for me to highlight the specific projects that we're talking about, I'd be glad to do that for you.
I would like to see the bigger ones.
Yeah, so
There's a number of higher profile and more dollars that,
yeah, so included in that capital outlays and equipment is not just road construction, but it's the activity that we're involved in to get things ready to go to construction. So there's engineering, utilities and right-of-way, utility relocations and right-of-way acquisition, and all totaled out of the road and bridge account, the land acquisitions is about $2.6 million. And then for the road construction activities, we'll fund a portion of our annual road improvement program, and that would be the testing and project management activities related to our road improvement program. The engineering activities in total are about $1.9 million of that total are in engineering services. And then the actual construction amounts, about $12.8 million. Those projects would be the road improvement program. We've got of sizable activity, noteworthy, the intersection of Home Road and 315. It's a $2.8 million project. The Pyatt Road extension next to the new high school in Berlin Township's $1.4 million, and a project to widen South Old 3C Highway in Genoa Township's $4.8 million, and our share of an intersection improvement project with ODOT and the Village of Galena at the Galena State Route 3 intersection. It's been a high accident location. We've got $300,000 in that. So those are the highlights of capital projects that are under this 100 capital project fund. When I go over the our road and bridge fund, we also are paying for a sizable slate of capital projects out of that fund as well, and so I'll go over those when I get to that next category. But that summary basically explains where this $17.4 million goes. We have $400,000 that we continue to do for local governments, agencies in Delaware County to match their local fund application for grant projects, primarily through OPWC. And the idea is the more local money we can bring to the table in these grant projects, the better chance we normally have of getting funded. And so we'll match a local government's contribution, local contribution to a project up to $50,000. So we set aside $400,000 annually for that purpose, and then the cash transfer item is mainly a bookkeeping item where we transfer money out of this fund into project-specific funds where we have state and federal grant projects that are accounted for separately. So it's basically an accounting procedure. That number is down almost 85% this year. And that's because the debt service on our Sawmill Parkway bonds will be paid from the remaining bond revenues as opposed to coming out of this account. So that's why you see that number so dramatically different than what it was last year. So that's the 100 fund in a broad overview. Let me stop there and ask if you have any questions about that before we move on to the motor and gas fund.
let's keep going.
Okay. So in motor and gas, the beginning balance in that fund is $28.2 million. We're expecting $8.9 million in revenue, $23.5 million in expenditures, and we're projecting a year-end balance of about $12.3 million. We have all of our employee compensation comes from this account. We're within the guidelines of the ranges that you prescribe to us, and we'll certainly understand where we are in terms of fringes and benefits, and fall well within those guidelines, I believe. You'll see a reduction in our materials and supplies and services and charges of 7.8% on materials and supplies, a 9.2% reduction in services and charges. It doesn't mean we're decreasing our services. It means we've just taken a look at what our actual expenditures have been in the last few years compared to what we budgeted, and we're trying to bring those more closely in line. And this budget is reflective of that reduction. So,
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had was,
I assure you we're not reducing our services to the public by doing that. It's simply
just you've been spending less than you budgeted in the last few years.
There's no reason for us to keep our budget at that level if it's not needed. Now, I will say, once this is in line, there may be coming years where we see those numbers grow by more than a 2% or 3% margin, just because as we build more and more projects, the cost of taking care of those will continue to increase, and the level our cost just to maintain our current level of service will grow as our system grows. And so I can't promise you we'll see a reduction in those numbers ongoing, but I think this is kind of a one-time reset to get us more closely aligned.
And when you're staffing in the engineers department, you're actually reducing one.
Yeah, we actually had a retirement that
you're not going to replace?
Not at this point.
Okay. And no increases in staff? No other?
There actually is, we have one increase in staff in the stormwater side, but not in the 290.
Okay.
And then our capital outlays out of this motor and gas fund are proposed to be $13.9 million. And I'll go through with you those specific projects. We'll have another $250,000 of land acquisition for right-of-way for projects $800,000, and then we have $250,000 in building improvements for a new salt storage facility that we plan to build in the Liberty Township Sawmill Parkway area to reduce our deadhead time of an empty truck coming all the way back to north of Delaware to get back down to an area of very high traffic. So we have that expenditure. Under road construction, $11.4 million, and we won't have any engineering out of that fund, but the construction of 11.25 includes a portion. We have a Cornerstone Drive extension project near the Columbus State Campus, and a traffic signaled home road in Cider Chase. Some of the larger projects would be the Lewis Center North Road intersection improvement, just east of the tracks there in the Lewis Center area. And,
west of the tracks.
Excuse me, west. Thank you. And then the remainder of the South Old State project, which, as you know, is a very large project. We have a $9.5 million remaining balance next year to pay for that project.
How do you distinguish what gets paid by the 100 fund and what gets paid by the 292 fund? Is there any?
There's not much.
I don't
think there are really many hard, fast rules on that.
Okay.
Generally, we try to use we don't use the road and bridge general fund account for operations.
Right.
So we first use that for capital expenses, and basically whatever's left we'll fill with the 292 fund.
Oh, okay, okay.
So in this case, it happens to be a very big number because that $900 will have to pay for
So,
supplements.
yeah. Okay.
Also, as we look in the out years of our 5-year plan, though, we're starting this year with a $28 million balance. We'll see that we're looking at that fund going down to
I know. I noticed that as
zero.
well.
So,
Oh, yeah.
so that, as you'll recall, we built that balance in anticipation of large projects like Sawmill Parkway. Ultimately made the decision, because of the favorable conditions, I think, to go ahead and bond that project, which left us with good news, left us with that balance to spend on other large-scale projects. But it's not you can see our revenues at 8.9 million a year really don't cover our costs just to operate, to provide the highway operation element of our budget. So we are living off of that balance that we built, and so we're still in a good place right now, but that's not a sustainable position.
Great, great.
So that's basically where we are on the capital outlay side. Do you have questions about that before we move on and talk about stormwater? I'll be glad to pause there if you'd like for me to.
Yeah, I had some questions, Commissioner Merrill, Commissioner Lewis. Questions as well?
Well, over the 5-year period, you're basically going to be approaching a very small balance. And do you feel comfortable with that long-term, or do some of these projects need to be deferred so we have some level of protection?
Yeah, first question, do I feel comfortable about it? No. That's part of the reason why I shared, Rob and I shared this information with you, is to show you the direction we're headed. There aren't projects on here that I think are unnecessary or that we shouldn't pursue or we shouldn't move forward with. This is simply a depiction of what it looks like for us to fund those projects under this scenario. Now, one of the assumptions here is that, the Big Walnut Interchange project does get approved to where we can move ahead with the first phase of that project with the interchange. We've made an assumption or the point that we would need at least $3.5 million, a minimum of $3.5 million of bond financing for our share of that project. One obvious solution would be for us to borrow more than 3.5, but 3.5 is the very minimum that we could look at under this funding scenario. So if we 5 years out or 4 years out, or I guess 2022 is when we have the interchange listed, we could look at and probably should look at bonding more than just the $3.5 million to free the money that we were going to spend cash on the interchange up for other projects. So that's one scenario.
You're talking about $17 million plus in 2021?
Yes.
Correct.
You're assuming, what, 30% from the county?
Thereabouts, I believe the total Phase 1 cost was about $36 million, so it ends up being maybe closer to half. Our request to track, ODOT track, was for $15 million, and then we do have some leftover earmark funding that we're using to get us through the engineering phase. That's about $3 million, so it works out to around half the cost. What we've proposed to ODOT would be paid locally.
Okay.
And nothing else.
Okay. Commissioner Lewis?
I guess just prioritizing among the projects, that's hard to do. Do you have any
Yes.
special priorities on the road?
Well, very much what we do is demand related, and with a few notable exceptions of projects like Sawmill Parkway, where we made a conscious decision to get out ahead of problems that we knew were coming. A lot of what we have here are just trying to address problems that already exist today, and so those priorities kind of fall out on their own. You know, the biggest areas of congestion or safety rise to the top in terms of project selection. We're not we don't ever sit around and wonder, you know, we need to find another project. The projects generally find us.
Yes.
And so, and the other thing I would say to you is that it takes, particularly if there's state or federal funding involved, it can take 2 or 3 years easily to get from the point where you decide you want to do a project just to get to construction. And then if you have any kind of complication along the way, if that complication happens at the wrong time, can move you back a construction season very, very easily. And so if we were to list all of the projects we have in all the 5 years, we might say we need to do this one before this one, but it's not physically possible based on the approval process or the funding or to necessarily put those in the order. So as a priority, the group, you know, I'd stand behind this group of projects that we have listed for you in the 5-year window and say all of those are necessary and needed. Are some of those more important today? Certainly, but some of those projects also may be more complicated and more time consuming. And you know, the Big Walnut Interchange is a good example. It's not listed in 2021-22 because it's not important or because it's less important than projects we're doing this year. It's just simply the process to get to the approval of where we can do it. That's really the best case scenario if we get positive response to our applications to the state and federal government. So
some of these will likely move farther forward just because of those kinds of things.
yeah, and some of them move faster because they're more simple. And if we have all local funding in a project, it can move faster than if it does with state and federal funds, because there are just procedural impediments that we don't have to endure. So.
The only other question I have is kind of a general one about President Trump saying that he wants to invest in infrastructure. And what have you heard on that? Anything concrete?
In my involvement at both the state and national level with our engineering associations, we're watching that very closely. The most recent discussion about that $1 trillion was, I think, pared down to about $250 million of federal commitment, and them expecting there to be public-private partnerships for
Leverage on it.
For a large portion. And the definition of infrastructure is very broad. It includes rail and waterways. It includes internet service and the electrical grid. And so when the federal government talks about infrastructure, at our level, we generally go right to roads and sewers, right? But the picture is much, much bigger. And so I don't begin to understand how the public-private partnership model works very well for us to fund local projects here at a local transportation network. I don't think we're going to sell the rights to any one of our roads to be tolled.
Yes.
So that model might fit the interstate system, and it may very well be very compelling and worthwhile, but in the bigger picture, I don't see it having a meaningful impact on us at the local level. But that could change on a dime, no
Yes.
pun intended.
Yes.
but it could. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Okay, go ahead.
I do have, I'm sorry. I do have one other question. It may be in here. The print's kind of small. The bridge over the railroad track between 23 and Lewis Center, is that in here?
The home road extension,
And the assumption is that's going to be covered with TIF dollars.
and hopefully some local, or some private dollars. I think the bridge over the railroad tracks, that portion of the project we've identified as primarily a county project, hopefully TIF funded. We're still in discussion with the developers of that site about how to fund the portion from 23 over to where the railroad grade
The
separation.
point of my question was, are we assuming right now that this is not going to be paid with TIF dollars, or are we assuming it will be paid with TIF dollars? Because I think that bridge is, what, $10 million?
Yeah, I think our assumption has the cost in here, but we didn't think the TIF would start generating enough revenue to, so the way I would see that is the TIF is paying, the county would probably have to be upfronting that cost, and then the TIF would be paying those revenues back. And so they don't show up as a revenue in our 5-year analysis simply because we don't think there's going to be enough there in that window to generate enough to pay for those.
The expectation is over time. it
Yeah,
can be
but if the development happens much faster than we anticipate or expect, then we certainly can modify the plan to show that.
Okay. Can we do TIF funding, TIF borrowing? I mean, I know it can be done. I don't know if we, the county, could do that. Have you ever done that, Chris?
But
I've seen it done.
I think it's more of a policy question, isn't it, Si? I mean, you could issue the debt, I
repaid
think,
with
just
TIF.
based on your...
We've not done it before.
We have not,
Okay.
but that is a possibility.
Would that,
And the other would be that simply that we just simply pay for that out of our capital revenues over
Sure.
in this window of the plan, and then pay the capital revenue fund back from the TIF proceeds.
right, are you aware of anybody that's done
I'm not
public
aware.
TIF fund borrowings?
I'm not aware of anybody.
And I've seen it done in the private sector, I just haven't. Okay, I'm interested in just maybe half a dozen specific projects that are on the list. Pyatt Road extension, I know that's really important when to get the school open and safe traffic access. What's the timing on that now? What does that look like?
Yeah, we will be done with the engineering on that within about the next 3 months, and our plan is to move ahead, bid out the construction contract. We have some property acquisition we'll have to do over this winter, starting in December or January through about May. Our goal is to have a construction contract bid and ready to award July 1st. If you recall, we have submitted for Ohio Public Works funding on that project. That money becomes available July 1st, and we cannot award a construction contract until after July 1st.
And that's if we get that.
If we
That's
get
not been
funding,
approved yet. Yeah.
That we're not waiting until July 1st. Frankly, that's about as soon as we could get there anyway with a contract award. Our goal is to get the first section, if you can envision where Glenmead, which is the subdivision just south of the school that's in place now, that portion of Pyatt Road north up to the school, have that done this fall. Fall of 18, not this fall, fall of 18. And then the remainder of that, south of Glenmead to Cheshire Road, would be built in 2019. We've got a lot of utility work to do at Cheshire Road for the intersection, as well as just the construction coordination. So.
We've talked about Big Walnut, so that's a really important one. Home Road, all the way from where we're widening it. I know there's 5, 6 projects
Yeah.
that are, not just Home Road, the east-west connector, if we want to call it that, Home Road, Lewis Center, and Big Walnut. What do you think there in terms of which phase will be done and which timeline? And I know, again, the east-west connector road is very important to all of us.
We have the intersection at 315.
Next
that
year?
project scheduled for next year, going and carrying over into, that carries over into 19, yeah. So, and then the section from 315 to 23, to Route 23 is the next section of that we have programmed. But that won't be until 2020.
Okay.
So,
That's the planned sequence at this point?
Yeah.
Is
and
then the bridge, or the Home Road east of 23, and then the bridge?
I think a lot of that depends on the discussions with the developer and finalizing some sort of financial arrangement there. I would note we do have the engineering for that extension east of 23 in our budget for next year.
Right.
So we've been in very recent discussions with prospective developers east of 23. And so I think our hope is we'll be able to come to some sort of agreement maybe this winter, if not earlier, and advance that project.
Okay.
so, just to put an exclamation mark behind Rob's point, having the engineering plans done then allows us to be flexible to respond to development funding scenarios that might be in place, and that we don't show that until 2023 in our plan. It could be
Moved up.
accelerated.
Okay. What would happen after that, then?
The next section would be between Liberty Road and 315, past the caverns.
Right.
We've done a preliminary study on that. We are proposing to continue engineering on that next year through 2019, and then probably construction in 2023 for that section.
Okay. And then what about on the east side of the railroad tracks? We've got from,
Your side?
yeah,
We treat that as that railroad overpass from Green Meadows over to Lewis Center
Okay.
as one project.
okay. Then east of Old State, where it's 2 lanes. That's in here, I think I saw. And then,
That section is not in here, but we actually had to study that area as part of the Big Walnut interchange traffic modeling.
okay,
That current 2-lane section between, or east of Old State Road will work fine for probably the next 10 to 15 years. At some point, it will have to be widened, but it's not in our immediate plan.
So what happens is that the Home Road extension over to Lewis Center picks up a lot of that traffic.
sure. Okay. Wilson Road. That's obviously a high priority project, and a whole lot of other funding is involved with the interchange, obviously, but
Talking about Wilson Road south.
south, yeah,
So that the county invested $8 million in the Simon Tanger deal to build it down to what is now the Corp line of the city or the village of Sunbury. So we wouldn't have any,
well, that's not, okay, that isn't the
we wouldn't have
county.
any county expenditure involved in extending Wilson Road.
Okay.
Unless there was some deal or, and I'm not suggesting there is, but the only way we would have responsibility inside the village limits for Wilson Road or any other road is if there was some funding agreement in place.
Okay.
Absent of that, we haven't included that in our plan.
Cutting to the chase, that was annexed, so really the Sunbury's responsibility.
It is.
Right, right. What about the Sawmill extension north of 42 over to to,
I'd build it tomorrow if we had an agreement with the city.
is that all city property?
It is not. It is actually, this was, Gary has better insight into this probably than even I do or anyone else, but that area is unincorporated, but it is in the area by sewer agreement, and I think water agreement, to be serviced by the city of Delaware. And so they would, it's, I think, a foregone conclusion to most of us that that area will annex into the city. And I think that connection was one of the last sticking points in our negotiations with the city on the sawmill deal. The city said, well, it's not in the city, and so the county should pay for it. And the county said, well, if we build it, you're going to turn right around and annex it. And so basically, we carved that piece out so that we could get the rest of the deal done. And I think that's where it still stands today, is kind of at a impasse over those issues. But I can, unless you've had conversations with the city about that, there hasn't been any, I haven't been party to any conversations for probably 6 months to a year about that, though I do think it's an important connection. I think we still see a good bit of traffic on Section Line Road that would be shifted over to the Parkway if that connection were there, and it would be to our benefit. It also would be to the city's benefit from an economic development standpoint of having those sites ready to develop. So,
But that's not in your
but it's not in
five-year
our,
numbers.
simply because there's no, I mean, for me to put a date on that would probably indicate that I know more about where that's headed than I do.
Okay, I noticed in here, I think I saw 3 bridges over the railroad. I think they're Orange and Liberty or Berlin, I'm not sure which ones. It'd be Orange Road, it'd be Home Road, and then Cheshire.
Cheshire, correct.
So I mean, that really is, the objective is to have 3 bridges through that corridor?
I mean, if you think about the growth that's occurring in that, picture right now if that area of Orange Township, if Powell Road or what's Polaris Parkway still had an at-grade railroad crossing, and that was the only, so there was no way across the railroad tracks if a train, very high train volumes on those tracks.
Change
as
the
they
dynamics
pass,
of Polaris.
or they stop for whatever reason. And you think about, and obviously I'm concerned about that from a traffic standpoint, but from an emergency response standpoint as well. So you picture that kind of density and realize what's been zoned with Evans and the parts up into Berlin Township, and to think that we're going to have that same kind of development in that area without any grade separation. Cheshire Road's the logical place for the next one.
Is that us or the city or both? I mean, the city,
The actual area that is still in the county.
but the city's providing the growth that's creating the problem.
Well, right now, I mean, if you look at the overall impact of the Evans Farms piece into Berlin Township, if that happens the way it's zoned and planned, then there'll be just as much township development feeding that as there is the city. If it comes to a point where that area gets annexed to the city, or that clearly becomes a city project versus county, we'll be glad to hand it off to them. I think it's prudent for us to move ahead with at least the planning and design, preliminary design aspects of that. And that's really what we're doing on both Cheshire and on Orange, is doing the initial planning work to determine the alignment and feasibility of those. And Cheshire Road has a lot of traffic from the city, has a lot of traffic not from the city as well. So
I noticed in
I think
the,
it's an us or them proposition.
in the 5-year plan, you've got other sources in the next to right column, and for those 3 projects, you've got 13 million, I think, on the Orange Road from other sources. Would that be Orange Township? Would they have the resources to,
Well, I think it would probably be a combination of Orange Township and potentially federal dollars or some other state or federal
Okay.
dollars, non-competitive.
okay, and the same thing with Home Road, you've got, I think, I can't quite read those numbers. Next year, if you could make them a little smaller, then we sure wouldn't be able to read them.
Yeah, that's, if you're trying to read them, that's a problem. See, we want to
Yes,
make
yeah.
them so small you can't.
We have $10 million in there, and the assumption is that we will apply.
Developer, TIF,
Well,
Where
our
can we
assumption is we'll apply for MORPC attributable federal funds.
Okay.
Most likely this coming funding cycle, which will be next summer. So to the extent that we front the money, that would be shown on the plan under our columns, I guess. The potential revenue that may show up in the form of a TIF or assessments will show
yes,
up on this sheet.
okay, okay. And then you've got I think 9 million on Cheshire in that other sources, same sort of
Yes.
thinking?
Yes.
Okay,
We think those are all good federal projects. Really, there's a substantial safety and traffic flow component to all those, so.
okay. The Career Center building, is that in your numbers anywhere? I don't know. You didn't have that
No,
plan to be,
but,
okay.
But it is something we want to either talk about in the context of this or when we get into the facilities planning. We really didn't know how to put a number on that, but we realized that we would be a participant in.
Okay.
I think the understanding, as I recall, it was you were going to be responsible for the purchase of that location, is that correct?
The what?
The Career Center? Wasn't that coming out of wasn't that the discussion we had earlier, I believe, at some point in the past?
You're talking about the renovation or
No,
the
the
cost of the
purchase.
purchase? I think we talked about that being an expenditure probably out of the 100 side, but I'm not party to that transaction or know how that
Okay.
came
But
about.
you don't have it in your...
We do not,
in the
but
numbers.
you tell us how we need to do that.
Okay. How about prevailing wage? If we could get legislation passed at the state level to make prevailing wage optional at the local level, which I think makes all the sense in the world, I mean, I assume that would help us do more with less money.
I think it would. Right now, the number we hear tossed around we generally hear it from the development community, what their costs are versus to build, and we take a bond, we increase that by, I think, 15 to 18% to cover the difference if we had to let the contract. I don't know if there's that much to be saved on highway projects. The complicating factor in all this is most of the larger construction contractors in the state, the contractors who are doing our jobs now and who are, not to say anybody's unqualified, but they're the ones that are probably the most efficient and experienced, already have union labor contracts set with the trade unions. And so it wouldn't be like one of those contractors could just decide to come in and bid these jobs as non-prevailing wage. The question I have is a contractor supply issue. A complicated project like like a railroad grade separation project. It's not. It's probably not a contractor for me to exaggerate, but to give to a contractor that's got a backhoe and a pickup truck. We need experienced, highly qualified contractors to turn those kind of projects over to. So it'll be interesting for me to see whether the contractor supply issue is addressed in that discussion.
What
I
did
want to
the-
make sure we get
Qualified, sure.
qualified and
Experience.
get the quality and
Right.
the efficiency in terms of the least disturbance to the public while these projects are going on.
What do private sector developers do in terms of how can they deliver it?
There is a whole different sector of contractors that do almost exclusively private development work that we don't see bid on our public side. Now, there are a few notable crossovers in all that, but in general, the contractors that are building internal subdivision streets are, and working for private developers are just are different in terms of they don't bid public work, and so they've kind of everybody's carved their own niche out of that. So there'll be some changing of niches if we move to the non-prevailing wage thing. Let me qualify everything I said there. I'd be very supportive of us lowering our costs by not requiring prevailing wage contracts. I don't see that as
Do you think
as a downside, but
out-of-state contractors would?
I think that's a
Because
possibility.
most states around us, I think, are non-prevailing wage, if I'm not mistaken, all of them.
Yeah, our state association is actually trying to do some research with other states about what that transition looked like when they went from prevailing wage to non-prevailing wage. I think Indiana did that last year, if I remember right. So
Okay.
we're actually trying to figure out if it was a problem or it wasn't a problem. And but there is some potential savings there. I honestly don't think it's 15 to 18%, but it's still, 10% of
200 million is still a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. So,
Yeah. Okay.
but it's all about legislature giving us that authority, and it's obviously a bigger issue in some counties than it probably is ours.
I think it's, I did have one other question on the maps area. We've got the map room.
Yes.
It's not a huge piece of your budget, but it is going through a significant increase. I'm not even sure which cost center it is.
What's that? Yeah. Yeah, we actually have an additional employee budgeted in the map department that's
That's the one you mentioned
workload
earlier.
related. So,
That's the only employee you've budgeted to add?
That's the addition you were referring to earlier?
Okay.
yes.
Now, do they get fees that would,
Sorry?
would they charge fees for their services that would?
Yeah, we sell maps for $1 a piece, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be facetious.
So we gotta
There are
sell-
some fees generated, but
sell 70,000
they're not
maps to break
significant.
even.
Yeah. It's basically reviewing surveys and documents for instruments of transfer, and as our county grows, there's more and more real estate transactions that they're involved in reviewing the.
Do we charge for that?
No, we do not. There's not permissive
Statutory,
authority
we're
for
not.
us to do that. So. Can I, since you brought up the map department, it is not an issue that I'll press this year, or do I have it proposed in the 5-year window, but it's worth me mentioning every so often, just to, the map department itself generally is a general fund expenditure, and it was up until the mid-2000s, I think 2007 or 8, whenever the county budget was incredibly tight, and the commissioners asked for ways for each department to look for ways to reduce the cost, and particularly the impact on the general fund. And we agreed at that, we suggested, it was our idea, to move the map department, at least, and at that time temporarily, into the motor and gas fund in order to provide, $300,000 or so annually of relief to to the general fund, and it still sits there today. We have obviously greatly benefited from our department, from the ability to do the kind of capital projects that the general fund pays for. We're paying for that out of our motor and gas fund in an area where our expenditures are exceeding our revenues for that segment of our budget, and so at some point that could become an issue again. I just wanted to just keep it out there so you're aware of that.
All right.
But I'm not asking you to do anything with that this year, or we haven't identified that as a reduced expenditure in our 5-year plan either. So.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
One more.
Earl?
Again, as Commissioner Benton referred to, the type is very small, but it may be in here, but I don't believe it would be. I don't think it'd be appropriate they would be in there. But I know the city's asking for help with the point. To looking at these numbers, to coin a phrase, there's no room in the end for any money for the point. So how are you dealing with that when the city asks you? What are you telling them?
Well, I've been told they're going to come ask again, and I haven't had that conversation yet. So we've not included it in this.
There doesn't appear to be any room in here for it.
No, anything we do in terms of moving projects is going to have the
Something
domino
else.
effect. If we have to move up Home Road up 2 years or 3 years, the Home Road overpass to Lewis Center to coincide with the development, we're going to have to reshuffle the order of other projects, and that same thing could be true. I don't know what kind of the size of expenditure. I think there's been a number floated, but it's going to be a policy decision, really, not just my decision on project selection about whether we do that. I appreciate you including me in those conversations and making, bringing my interest to bear in those decisions. But any decision we make about funding municipal projects with county funds will bring with it other requests from other municipalities for participation in city and village projects.
I wasn't suggesting we should fund it.
I understand.
I'm just suggesting that it doesn't appear to be
So
any money.
until we collectively come to an agreement that we need to, for a specific, unique, justifiable reason, support that project, I've not included it in this plan.
Yeah, one related question. You mentioned the sawmill extension over to Section Line. If I ask you the question, which is more important to the county, sawmill extension or the point, I got a feeling you'd say sawmill extension.
Important to the county, yes.
Yes. And
Oh, really? That's how.
the,
In terms of what the impact is on
Yeah.
our transportation system and how traffic moves on our county roads. Now, if you're talking about, my interpretation of your question was about the importance to the county road system.
That was the
By the
question.
county road system, those are the roads that we're responsible for maintaining. Now, in terms of the populace collectively and the traffic, that's a different question, but
and I don't have the answer to this, I probably shouldn't even ask this point, but with the point, Glen Road, sawmill extension, and I'll include the Chester Road Bridge, there's almost a need at some point for, some of these are county roads, but they're adjacent to the city and there's mutual impact. There's almost a need for some overview or a larger discussion than just the point. That's a question / comment?
Yeah, I think it's a suggestion that I think is accurate. And this won't just be this isn't just a Delaware City, Delaware County issue. I mean, the same thing's true with Columbus, same thing's true with Powell, probably true with Dublin and in Concord Township and Westerville and Genoa Township, and how the issues are, though our jurisdictions and our responsibilities change at the corp line, the people we serve don't necessarily understand that distinction, and so I agree with you. I do think it's appropriate that we continue the investigation into the Transportation Improvement District idea and see how that might address your comment to say if the jurisdiction is involved all agreed to some level of support of a transportation improvement district, then the district could be the vehicle to take on these kind of overlapping jurisdiction and regional projects. And so I'm open to that discussion, and I think it's probably wise for us to investigate that further. I'm not here today to propose that to you as a final solution, but I think it has merit.
Okay. Other side, anything?
I did stop short of the stormwater budget, so I should probably...
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I should probably wrap that up. There's nothing really exciting there.
Yeah, that one was pretty straightforward.
So there is $670,000 budget there, revenues of $386,000, expenses $482,900, and projecting an ending balance of $573,000. And it's an enterprise fund, so it basically lives off of the revenues that it generates, and it's primarily a compensation and fringe expenditure.
You show compensation overtime up by 9.3, but you show benefits down.
Yeah, actually, I think we had an employee move from family to single. It's a pretty small, on healthcare, it's a pretty small department, and so one move like that shows up as a reduction.
Yep. Well, I kind of, and I didn't have any other questions on stormwater. Again, the magnitude of the dollars is significant, and if we can work on ways to address it big picture like a TID or something else, then it certainly merits further discussion as you're suggesting. So again, I really appreciate the way you've laid it out. It's obviously fluid in terms of priorities, but again, it's very helpful the way you've laid it out.
Let me just take the opportunity to commend our staff, if you don't mind me tooting our own horn just
Go
a
right
little
ahead.
bit, but most significantly, Rob and his effort as chief deputy. I was looking back, when I started to work for the county in 1989, I think our budget was about $3 million total. And so we've grown to a budget of this size and a 5-year plan of
$200 million.
$200 million, and pretty much the same size staff that we've had. I mean, we've had some growth, but I give Rob an awful lot of credit for this transition, and I think we can't overemphasize how important good people are, not just in my department, across the county. I just see good people everywhere, and people that care about what they're doing, but there's no place it's more true than in our department, and I want to say thanks to Rob and all of our staff for what they do.
He's going to blush.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Rob.
You look better than he looks.
What's that?
I think you're blushing for him. You look
That's all right. So.
That's good. Again, very helpful.
Very much.
Very helpful.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
And we'll continue to work on
Gosh.
the priorities. I mean, it's a constant challenge, which is a good thing to have.
It is.
In
It's
the grand
sure
scheme of
better than
things.
the alternative, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Some counties are closing bridges and roads, and
Yeah.
thankfully, we're not having to do that. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions for the engineers group, so thanks, Chris.
If I could, I'm kind of the segue into the soil and water budget because of the three-party agreement between the county commissioners, the engineer, and the Soil and Water Conservation District on managing the county's drainage maintenance program.
Okay.
That's why we always put our budgets back to back, because there is some overlap there in terms of all three parties, but I will turn it over to Scott and Milt and let them talk about what's ahead, and I think you'll start with drainage maintenance, is that right? Okay. Yeah. And Bonnie, I'm sorry.
All right, we've not had a chance to look at these numbers, so we'll just, we'll turn it over to you to Scott and Milt, Bonnie, whoever wants to lead the presentation.
Start. So, I guess to sum up the drainage maintenance program.
Mike, want to move the mic over here closer?
We'll share it, Bill. Is that better? Can you hear? All right. So for the drainage maintenance budget, I'll just start off with when we started to looking back on the program and looking ahead at the program. The growth of that program and the budget along with it has been significant. You look back at 2010, we were about $53 million of infrastructure, and we're going to crack the $100 million mark of infrastructure that's on the county drainage maintenance program. And with that responsibility has come a steady influx in staff. And really, if you look about the 2012, 2013 mark is when we really felt the need to really start to ramp up the ditch maintenance staff, and we're at 6 individuals there now, then plus a percentage of the remaining district SWCD staff's time to manage that program. And I don't see any reason why that trend is going to change. I mean, we've been double-digit growth plus some every year for the last several years, and it's not going to change.
One of the things that's happened is we've just passed, Scott mentioned 97 million, but in that's 516 projects. I went back today and looked, since about 2000 or thereafter, we've had 22 projects that they said would never become on maintenance. They're existing subdivisions that were built after the requirement to go in, condos and subdivisions. We've had 22 of them. That the landowners petition went through the hearings. You always love sitting there going to the viewings and the hearings. You understand that. But it's, believe it or not, there's been 22 of them projects. And we just had one the other day, a viewing that involves 417 houses. That's pretty much, in my eyes, pretty much unreal. It's just, they come and find us, we don't go find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the Wedgwood project.
Wedgwood.
Yeah, and that's why I ask them generally how they heard about it, because again, I didn't know about it before I got here, and it's word of mouth. It's township people. It's
the other thing I found out that there's a condo association of condos throughout and they get up and they talk about their problems, all that, and I guess that I'm hearing that we must be doing something wrong because they're breaking us up. And that's how some of the condos have come to us.
Homeowners associations have management-type meetings or seminars and so forth, and they discuss how they're managing their infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, and, it doesn't take long for a homeowner association, when they realize it's either up to them or their neighbors to manage that, they immediately start looking for some relief somewhere, and we're at this point.
Right,
It's a good thing.
It's a
good
compliment.
thing. That decision in 1998 to start down that path of drainage maintenance and the stormwater infrastructure, I think that was a forward-thinking decision, and positions this county like few others to be on top of and not become like you know, a lot of municipalities that you hear with, you're running around stomping out fires instead of proactively trying to manage that infrastructure. That's huge. And you think about the prosperity of the county moving forward, that's just a significant undertaking, however, a good one.
Yep. Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Any questions on the budget?
No, well,
I did.
yes, I
Can
just,
you explain your funding request?
As far as, is there a specific item there, or just want to go through
Just
kind of
from your
by?
memo that you had
Oh, no, that'd be for the district. If we're done with the ditch maintenance, I'll move into that, and we can discuss that.
I guess that's a question I got, is what is the budget for the ditch maintenance, since we haven't had a chance
Almost at the
to?
very end. It is the very
It's
end.
it's the last, it may not, I'm not sure if that made it into the packet with the,
ditch maintenance didn't make this packet.
didn't here.
We're here.
I got 3 copies
You have
here.
copies?
I didn't see it. They're testing us.
Have it?
That'd be the back page of
Okay.
that, would be the actual number.
Ah, there we go.
So the total anticipated appropriation, we're looking at 1.26 million for the, with an estimated revenue of 1.6. And there's a, part of that is the law would suggest that we should or may have up to 20% of that 97 million essentially in the bank, if you will, as potential operating funds. So as those projects get older, we need to monitor that aspect of it, not only our annual expenditure, but how much money are we setting in reserve to manage some potential significant, big storm come through. One of the things, the Emerald Ash Borer's created quite it's one of those things that I don't know, there's a lot of talk about it, then all of a sudden it's here, and you have, drainage ways with, every time the wind blows, we're pulling trees out of that channel. So it's those type events. Hopefully not, but we had a tornado at one point there, created a pretty significant a project for us, so that's just that money in reserve, and just to monitor that and grow that account, or that side of the account accordingly.
How much do we have in reserve currently?
We're at about 8%. It's about $8 million would be cash, I'll call it cash on hand, we'll say. So we're appropriating 1.2 million of that to spend.
So what's preventing us from starting to build that reserve?
Well, it's nothing preventing us from doing it. It's just one of those incremental things with the average. I look back at our average project, and Milt mentioned the 500 and some projects. They're about 15 years old at this point, give or take. So some of the older projects, we're ahead of that. We're somewhere maybe in the 10 or 12 or 15% on a per project basis. Obviously some of the newer ones, it takes some period of time to ramp up to that 20%. Probably ideally, you'd be in maybe the 15, 16% cash on hand as the projects would start to get into that 25 or 30-year range. That's a conversation that kind of been ongoing and starting to really think about that. I mean, the project, again, from 98 on, everything was brand new in 98, save for the original 28 or 30 projects that have been put on maintenance between 1957 and 98. So we're starting to move out of what I'll say kind of the infancy of a lot of those projects. We'll say maybe the honeymoon's over, and we're starting to move into that middle years and to think about really building that account, preparing as those projects get older, some major infrastructure need out there, we're prepared to deal with that.
So the assessments are $1,608,000.
Right.
The expenditures, appropriations are $1,262,000, so you're still generating a surplus that
That's
will
right.
add to that $8 million.
Yes.
Presumably.
Yes.
Yeah, we have projects that have hit the 20%, and by law, unless it's encumbered, we can't go
You have
above
to
that.
stop.
We're actually starting to look at some of these to encumber money into it. The other thing is we have 500 basins, 250 of them are dry, what we consider dry only during rain times, that it's wet. We're starting to look at them, and we're finding that in the neighborhood of 35 to 45% of them are going to need work on them, which means they may need 1, 2, 3 truckloads of dirt come out of them to get the capacity back. Is it a major breakdown? No, but it's something we're looking at. We're starting to investigate each and every one, which takes time, and setting up what needs to come out. But that's an example. The concrete pipe and stuff, unless we have a major failure, we should have anywhere from 75 to 100 years before they really need it, but we're looking at starting to camera them to find out what are they doing. That's the worst part. You can't see what's going on underground.
Sure.
But we have to start getting baselines for them.
So even $1.2 million that you're proposing to appropriate, you've got almost $600,000 of reimbursement to Soil and Water Conservation District salaries and benefits.
Correct.
How does that compare to this year's number?
This year's, that's going to be up about 7%, just on that. Let me look here. Yeah, it'll be about 7 or 8%.
In the same,
That would include a new, and one additional staff member in there, at least at a mid-year point. So,
for next year?
correct, going into 18.
Okay. That's kind of where I was headed. I figured that, and certainly the activity that you got going on, you got a lot of work in process and so on. Okay, that's all the questions I got on that one.
Yeah, nothing?
Here. Si? You good? Okay.
Well,
All right, so-
just move ahead.
Sure. So on the what we call the special fund, or the 721 account, the district account there, the guidance that was sent out to us, so the 310,320 would be that, I think, roughly a 3% increase on that line item from what the appropriation was, the additional from the general fund buddies last year. And then the additional 20,000, we would really like to being able to consider adding at least a part-time staff to bolster our outreach and education aspect of our district or of our office, and that would be in part to, for the drainage maintenance program, and then just in general. We work with really virtually every unit of government in the county. We do a little bit of work with POW, we do some work with Shawnee Hills, obviously the county, USDA, just to not be a secret, to sharpen our edge as far as our social media, our online, the website, those type activities.
Okay.
If you wanted to.
And one of the examples of the adult outreach that we're looking at is we're partnered with 9 counties in central Ohio. If you're familiar with Northeast Ohio, they have a tagline, Lake Erie starts here. Southwest Ohio has Save Our Local Waters, and Western Lake Erie Basin has Healthy Land, Healthy Lake. We don't really have a message where we're all working together in central Ohio, even though we share a lot of the same water resources. So this year we started working with Fairfield, Franklin, Knox, Licking, Morrow, Marion, Madison, and Union for a 9-county consortium, Delco, some of the watershed groups. And we promoted this message called Be the Change for Clean Water. We do have a website now. We're applying to the Ohio Environmental Education Fund for grant money to get some messaging that we can share amongst all of us and get that message that water quality is important where you live, work, and play, because we have a lot of people that go back and forth for jobs and where they live. It's not all in the same spot anymore. So we just felt that was really important, and that position could help with those public relations efforts.
Did that answer the question, Si? Just to make
Yes.
The other thing that in the cover letter there, I would just to point out, we indicate, and this is not new, this has been the trend for some time now, one of the other significant portions of our budget would be those state match dollars that come from the state legislature, obviously via the Ohio Soil and Water Conservation Commission. That funding statewide has been flat for about 15 years at this point, at about $10 million in state funds. The allocation of those funds are such through the Conservation Commission that our percentage here locally of that has dropped, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, up as much as 6% of that. So we've struggled on the state side, and fortunately for our local, our work with the county commissioners, your support of our office, as well as those other opportunities with municipalities and other entities locally, we've been able to stay pretty much even for the last several years, in spite of that state match dwindling. So we've managed here, but there are other soil and water districts across the state. That has been
Sure.
has been devastating for them to continually see that, your percentage, the local funding goes up, state match goes down, well, stays the same, and by percentage goes down across the state.
What do you think the expectation is on the part of the state when they keep it flat? Are they expecting
Did they give you a
to do with
target?
less, or are they expecting the counties to always be there to give more?
That is the impact of the state budgeting on local government. That's you know far better than I do the impact that's been there.
I think that's a rhetorical question.
It is. I appreciate that. I don't know. I don't know where that, I don't know where that begins, where that ends, what the state legislature's expectation is of local government to continue to fill that gap. That's the Medicaid tax, the state and local, the SALT, the state and local, there are a lot of moving pieces to that. And how, as for soil and water districts, a few percent here or there on the big stage doesn't mean a whole lot, but for a soil and water conservation district with a relatively small budget, 2 or 3% is a lot. It's a lot. Our federation, this is something that we have a lot of discussion about as a family of soil and water districts across the state with our Ohio Federation, how to approach the legislature, what are other opportunities to do that, and there's a lot of discussion about how to attack that issue. There's no piece of legislation on the table right now that would fix that. A fair amount of that $10 million comes from it's an add-on fee or a tack-on to EPA fees for solid waste disposal, construction, demolition, debris. There's some discussion about trying to raise that fee a little bit, although that's not. There's no legislation on to do that. I think we've got to look at some secure source funding, but again, it's tough. It's tough at the State House to get something like that off the ground. At the point in time we have something in place, or we feel that we would have sponsorship, I will certainly be asking your support in that, or your input on what that would look like for us locally.
How active are some of the soil and water groups in other counties? I guess I'm thinking like Hocking or counties that don't have the wherewithal that we do.
They struggle, and that's, we're in the top 3, certainly top 5 soil and water districts, budget, staff-wise, just our program as a whole. Those more rural districts, especially you mentioned Hocking County. I know Morgan County has struggled greatly with their soil and water district office. And the commission, that's part of the state match. They've tried to keep those soil and water districts, keep their place on the map, so to speak, and they've tried to funnel some funds there. And I don't want to say taking them away from the larger counties, but we've tried to keep a presence in every county across the state as soil and water conservation districts. But it is, and they don't have those, Chris, our agreement with the NPDS work that Chris mentioned. They don't have necessarily that MS4 commitment in their community to even to approach those dollars. There's just no program there to be a part of. We have tremendous opportunity here in this county. We are so fortunate when you look across the state, especially on just as a general statement, but certainly on the soil and water conservation district side of things. They would only have general fund from their commissioners and state match, and maybe some other smaller things, drill rental programs, and we do a little bit of that, but it's not, it's not a major portion of the budget by any stretch. Never has been, wouldn't be moving forward.
Okay. I was afraid of that.
I probably should know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it because I don't know the answer to this question.
Go ahead.
Is soil and water the one that does drainage and maintenance in every county, or does it vary?
No.
It's always the county engineer's responsibility.
Okay, I was just curious how that
The
works.
6137 law does provide that to be handed off by the county engineer to soil and water. That's actually listed in the last time they changed the.
Well, I just want to say you guys do a heck of a job, so, but I didn't know if that was the traditional format, or does it vary from county to county, and obviously varies?
Just the exception, I think.
We are.
By the exception?
We get, I know Milt's traveled around the state. I mean, we can't go to a regional or statewide meeting that a soil and water board member from another county or a county commissioner, how have you done it? How have you forged that relationship? How have you built the capacity to do that? And I tell them it starts with your three commissioners.
Apparently the county engineer started with.
What's that?
Oh, with the county engineer.
Well, it's all, yes, it's a three-way agreement, but without the support, the 6131, I mean, you folks take your lumps, you know, I mean, and without your commitment and willingness to be a part of that, it wouldn't work. It just couldn't work in a county.
I think you guys do a great job.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you
Constantly
really do.
impressed,
Yep.
and feel very comfortable that it's going to be proper funding there down the road to take care of the issues as they arise. And I think we feel, I think to all commissioners, we feel like we're in good hands in that regard.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Continue to be
We'd
so.
also like to appreciate our board members.
I was just going to say, your board members are often here
Yes.
when you come before us.
Yeah, certainly a big help.
Yes, thank you for your
Thank you.
service.
Any other questions?
No.
I didn't have any other questions. Si? Nope. Okay.
You
Well,
need to give this back.
thank you. Yeah, thank you again for putting that together and bringing us up to date.
Yeah,
Obviously, Si, we'll be in touch.
excellent. If you got any questions, I don't hesitate. I know you got a long way to go with this
exactly.
process, so don't
The
hesitate.
numbers are pretty green at this point, so we'll see how they shake
Yep.
out.
Green. Yeah, green in many ways.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah,
Thank you, Chris.
all right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for coming.
Good job.
Yes, I was before I step on.
Yeah. Okay, no other business today, so we will recess, right, Jennifer?
Recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning with Judge Fuller.
Judge Fuller, okay.
And you were going to check on,
I believe Ms. Herron has a call into Cy, so he's going to check with her when he calls.
what I suggested was, since the 1 o'clock or 1:30 got canceled, because we moved Board of Elections up earlier in the day, we're waiting for an answer.
The 1 o'clock tomorrow?
Yeah, was it tomorrow?
The board is tomorrow, Board of Elections.
Fully is ill, so he.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
We just found, he just had.
Okay, so data will not present at 1 o'clock tomorrow.
Correct, we moved them to the 15th.
Okay.
So the next one's going to be like at 3 o'clock or 3:30, so the question was,
Sure.
is there a way we can move it up? And we don't have an answer, but
Okay.
you guys good with that, I assume?
Yeah.
So we're